The air in the lawyer's office tasted like old paper and stale coffee, a bitter combination that coated my tongue as I stepped through the heavy oak door. The scent of leather from the chairs mingled with something sharper, more chemical. Maybe the cleaning solution they'd used on the mahogany conference table that dominated the center of the room. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step echoing in the space like a countdown, and I felt the vibration travel up through my legs, settling somewhere in my chest where my heart had begun to beat just a little too fast. Marcus was already seated, his back to me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders even from behind, the way his suit jacket pulled tight across his back. He didn't turn around when I entered. Next to him, she sat with her legs crossed, one foot bouncing with barely contained excitement, the patent leather of her shoe catching the afternoon light that filtered through the blinds. Stephanie. That was her name, though I'd spent months referring to her only as the mistress in my mind, as if giving her a real name would make her more substantial, more real. The room was too warm. Someone had turned the heating up too high, and I could feel sweat beginning to form at the small of my back, where my silk blouse met the waistband of my skirt. The fabric clung to my skin in a way that made me want to squirm, but I kept my face perfectly composed, my mother's voice in my head reminding me that a lady never lets them see her discomfort. Around the table, faces I'd seen at countless family dinners over the past 8 years stared at me with expressions ranging from smug satisfaction to barely concealed greed. Marcus's mother sat at the far end, her fingers drumming against the polished wood, her rings clicking with each tap, a sound that set my teeth on edge. "You're late," Marcus said, finally turning to look at me. His voice had that edge to it, the one he'd developed over the past 6 months, sharp and cutting, designed to make me feel small. His cologne, the expensive one I'd bought him for his last birthday, mixed with her perfume, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. The scents tangled together in the air between us, a physical manifestation of their affair that I could smell and taste and feel pressing against my skin. "Traffic," I said simply, taking the empty seat across from them. The leather was cold against my legs, and I could feel the slight texture of it through my thin stockings, a sensation that grounded me, reminded me that this was real, that I was really here, about to watch my husband try to strip away everything he thought I had. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie, cleared his throat. The sound was wet and uncomfortable, and I watched his Adam's apple bob up and down as he swallowed. "Shall we begin?" he asked, his fingers already reaching for the stack of documents in front of him. The paper rustled as he straightened the pile, a whisper of sound that somehow felt too loud in the expectant silence. "Yes," Marcus's mother interjected, her voice carrying that imperious tone she'd perfected over decades of getting exactly what she wanted. "Let's not waste any more time. We've been patient long enough." I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the coolness of my wedding ring against my skin. The metal had warmed from my body heat during the walk from the parking garage, but now, in this air-conditioned office, it was cooling again, a small circle of cold that reminded me of the day Marcus had slipped it on my finger. I could still remember the weight of it then, how new it had felt, how I'd kept touching it with my thumb throughout the reception, unable to believe that I was actually married, actually starting this life I'd dreamed of. "As you're aware," the lawyer began, his voice taking on that particular quality lawyers use when they want to sound both authoritative and detached. "This meeting has been called to discuss the matter of certain inherited assets and properties." He pushed his glasses up his nose, leaving a slight smudge on one lens that caught the light. "Mr. Whitmore has requested that you formally renounce any claim to the inheritance that was, until recently, believed to be part of the marital estate." The way he said "believed to be" sent a small thrill through me, but I kept my face neutral, my breathing steady. I could feel Marcus's eyes on me, watching for any sign of weakness, any crack in my composure. Stephanie leaned forward slightly, and I caught another wave of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, and something else I couldn't identify. She was wearing a bracelet that jingled softly when she moved, a delicate sound that seemed out of place in this room full of heavy furniture and heavier intentions. "The inheritance in question," the lawyer continued, shuffling through his papers, the sound of it like leaves rustling in wind, "includes the estate in Montecito, the property portfolio in the Bay Area, various investment accounts, and the controlling shares in Hartwell Industries." He looked up at me, his eyes magnified slightly by his glasses. "The total estimated value is approximately $47 million. I heard someone's sharp intake of breath, probably Marcus's younger brother, always the least subtle of the family. The number hung in the air between us, and I could see the way Stephanie's eyes lit up, the way she squeezed Marcus's hand under the table. I could see his fingers tighten around hers, his knuckles going white with the pressure. The gold of his wedding band, twin to mine, caught the light for just a moment before his hand disappeared back under the table. 47 million, Marcus's mother repeated, and there was something hungry in her voice, something raw, which should rightfully belong to our family, not to some outsider who happened to marry in. She didn't look at me when she said it, her eyes fixed on some point past my shoulder, as if I wasn't even worth the effort of direct address. The word outsider settled on my skin like oil, slick and uncomfortable. After 8 years of marriage, after 8 years of attending their functions and hosting their dinners and biting my tongue when they made their little comments about my background, about the fact that I'd worked as a nurse before meeting Marcus, about my mother's accent and my father's profession, I was still an outsider. The knowledge of it should have hurt, but instead it felt clarifying, like wiping steam off a mirror and finally seeing clearly what had always been there. Mrs. Whitmore, the lawyer said, addressing me directly for the first time, and I noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he pushed a packet of papers across the table toward me. The document slid across the polished wood with a soft hiss, coming to rest directly in front of me. These documents formalize your renunciation of any claim to the inheritance. By signing them, you acknowledge that you have no legal or financial right to any of the assets listed herein. I reached for the papers, feeling the cool smoothness of the expensive cardstock under my fingertips. The edges were perfectly cut, professionally bound, the kind of documents that screamed money and power and legal authority. I could smell the ink, still faintly chemical, suggesting these had been printed recently, probably this morning. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make this official, to make it binding. I assume you've read through these already? I asked, my voice steady, almost curious. I flipped through the pages slowly, feeling the weight of each sheet, watching the words blur slightly as they passed. My heart was racing now, pounding so hard I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my wrists, even in the tips of my fingers where they touched the paper, but I kept my breathing slow and measured, counting silently to myself the way my yoga instructor had taught me years ago. Your lawyer was sent copies 3 days ago, Marcus said, and there was impatience in his voice now, frustration that I wasn't simply signing immediately. You've had plenty of time to review. This isn't complicated. You're giving up something that was never yours to begin with. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, made me want to laugh, but I swallowed the impulse, feeling it burn in my chest like acid. Instead, I turned another page, my eyes scanning the dense legal language, the whereas clauses and the party of the first part, the language designed to confuse and intimidate anyone without a law degree. Never mind to begin with, I repeated softly, tasting the words. They were bitter on my tongue, leaving a metallic aftertaste that reminded me of blood. That's an interesting way to put it. Stephanie shifted in her seat, uncrossing and recrossing her legs, her foot bouncing faster now. I could feel her impatience radiating across the table, her eagerness to get this done, to claim what she clearly thought was about to become theirs. She was younger than me by almost 10 years, with that kind of glossy perfection that came from expensive salons and personal trainers, and never having worked a day shift in an emergency room, never having held someone's hand while they died, never having seen the worst of what life could do to a person. Her nails were perfect, painted a deep red that matched her lipstick, and I wondered idly if she'd gotten them done specially for this occasion, if she'd told the manicurist she was about to come into money. This is a fair agreement, Marcus's father spoke up for the first time, his voice gravelly from too many years of cigars and whiskey. We're not asking you to leave with nothing. There's a settlement amount included. Very generous considering. I found the relevant section, my eyes catching on the number. $250,000. $250,000, which would have seemed like an enormous sum to the girl I'd been 10 years ago, fresh out of nursing school with student loans and dreams of making a difference. But compared to $47 million, it was insulting. It was change you'd leave on a table, a tip for good service. The paper crinkled slightly under my fingers as I gripped it a little too hard, and I forced myself to relax, to smooth the page back down. Generous, I echoed, and this time I couldn't quite keep the dry amusement out of my voice. Yes, very generous indeed. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his tie loosening slightly as he moved. I could see a small stain on it, near the bottom, maybe from lunch. Coffee, probably, knowing his habits. Look, he said, and his voice had shifted now, taking on that reasonable tone he used when he was trying to manipulate someone, trying to make them think he was being fair when he was really just backing them into a corner. We both know this marriage is over. You've known it for months. Hell, you've probably known it longer than I have. This is just making it clean, making it official. You sign these papers, take the settlement, and we can all move on with our lives." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant buzz that I'd tuned out when I first entered but now seemed to fill the entire room. Someone had put air freshener somewhere, probably plugged into an outlet behind the credenza, and the artificial pine scent mixed with everything else, creating a nauseating cocktail that made my head swim slightly. I pressed my fingers against the table, feeling the solid wood beneath them, using the sensation to anchor myself. "Move on with our lives," I said, turning another page. "Is that what you're calling it?" "Don't be difficult," Marcus's mother snapped, and I looked up to meet her eyes. They were cold, calculating, the same shade of gray as Marcus's, but without any of the warmth his used to have, back when he used to look at me like I mattered, like I was something precious worth protecting. "You married into money, lived well for 8 years, and now it's time to acknowledge reality. That money doesn't belong to you. It belongs to this family." The irony of it hit me again, sharp and sweet, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. The pain was grounding, a small bright point of sensation that helped me maintain my composure. I could taste copper, knew I'd broken skin, but the sting of it felt good, felt real in a way that this whole surreal meeting didn't. "I see," I said quietly, returning my attention to the documents. I turned another page and another, letting the silence stretch. The clock on the wall ticked audibly, each second marked with a small click that seemed to grow louder the longer no one spoke. I could hear Marcus's breathing getting faster, could sense his growing frustration like a physical presence in the room. The lawyer cleared his throat again. "If you're ready to sign, Mrs. Whitmore, we can proceed. We'll need your initials on pages 3, 7, 11, and 15, and your full signature on the final page. There are witnesses present, and I'll notarize the document immediately." I picked up the pen he'd placed beside the papers earlier. It was heavy, expensive, the kind of pen that cost more than some people's weekly grocery budget. The metal was cool in my hand, and I could feel the slight texture of the engraving along the barrel, though I didn't look down to read what it said. I clicked it once, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and watched as everyone tensed slightly, leaning forward in anticipation. "Make up your mind now," Marcus said, and there was command in his voice, the voice of someone used to getting what he wanted, when he wanted it. "We don't have all day." I looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the face I'd woken up next to for 8 years. He'd aged well, kept himself in shape, kept the gray at his temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. He was handsome, successful, everything I'd thought I wanted when I was 24, and naive, and so desperate to believe in fairy tales. But looking at him now, with Stephanie's lipstick on his collar and his hand holding hers under the table and his eyes hard with greed and impatience, I couldn't remember what I'd ever seen in him. "Of course," I said calmly, and I began to initial the pages. My handwriting was steady, each letter formed carefully, precisely. I could feel the scratch of the pen against paper, hear the slight sound it made, like a whisper of secrets. On page 3 I initialed, on page 7, on page 11, on page 15. Each time, I felt the weight of their expectation, their assumption that they'd won, that I was just another trophy wife too stupid or too weak to fight back. When I reached the final page, I paused for just a moment, the pen hovering over the signature line. I could see my full name printed there, Catherine Marie Hartwell Whitmore. I'd kept my maiden name hyphenated, against Marcus's wishes, against his mother's very vocal objections. "It's not proper," she'd said at the time. "You're a Whitmore now, that should be enough." But I'd insisted, and Marcus, still in the honeymoon phase, had eventually relented. Looking at my name now, I was grateful for my stubbornness. I signed, the motion fluid and confident, my name flowing across the page in dark blue ink. The pen made a soft scratching sound, and I could feel every loop and line, the muscle memory of a signature I'd written thousands of times. When I finished, I set the pen down carefully, precisely, letting it rest exactly parallel to the edge of the document. "There," I said, pushing the papers back across the table. They slid across the polished wood, coming to rest in front of the lawyer, who immediately began gathering them up with hands that trembled slightly with either excitement or nervousness. All done. Marcus didn't wait for the lawyer to finish. He turned to Stephanie, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek with a tenderness that used to be mine. Then he kissed her, long and deep and public, a claiming gesture that was meant to humiliate me, to show me exactly where I stood in his priorities now. I watched their reflection in the window behind them, saw the way their bodies pressed together, saw his hand slide down to her waist, possessive and proud. Around the table, the Whitmore family was practically vibrating with satisfaction. Marcus's mother smiled, thin-lipped and victorious. His father nodded approvingly and reached for his phone, probably already calculating how to divide the spoils. His brother smirked, clearly enjoying my supposed humiliation. Even the lawyer looked pleased, no doubt thinking about his substantial fee for making this happen. "Well," Marcus said when he finally broke the kiss, his voice slightly breathless, his lips still curved in a smile. "That's that then. Catherine, you can show yourself out. We have some celebrating to do." He turned back to the computer screen that Stephanie had been monitoring earlier, his arm around her shoulders, already dismissing me from his mind. I stood slowly, feeling the blood rush to my legs after sitting so long, pins and needles dancing across my skin. I smoothed down my skirt, an automatic gesture, and picked up my purse from where I'd set it on the chair beside me. The leather was soft under my fingers, worn smooth from years of use. It had been a gift from my mother, one of the last things she'd given me before she died, and touching it now felt like drawing strength from her memory. "Actually," I said, and my voice was clear and calm and just a little bit amused, "there is one thing." Marcus barely glanced at me, his attention already on the screen where Stephanie was pulling up spreadsheets, columns of numbers that represented what they thought was their future. "What?" he asked impatiently, his hand waving dismissively. "The inheritance you're so excited about," I said, taking a step toward the door but not leaving yet, not quite ready to exit this stage. The one I just formally renounced any claim to. I think there might be a small misunderstanding about whose family it actually belongs to. That got his attention. His head snapped toward me, and I saw confusion flicker across his face, followed quickly by irritation. "What are you talking about? My grandfather left that money in a trust. It's been in the Whitmore family for 3 generations. Your grandfather," I agreed, nodding slowly, "did have a trust. About $6 million, if I recall correctly. That's a nice sum. Certainly nothing to sneeze at." I paused, enjoying the way the confusion was spreading around the table now, like ink in water, staining their certainty. "But that's not the inheritance we were just discussing, is it?" The lawyer had gone very still, his hands frozen in the act of stamping the notary seal. His eyes darted between me and Marcus, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, see the moment understanding began to dawn. His face paled, and the hand holding the stamp began to shake slightly. "The 47 million, I continued, my voice pleasant, conversational, as if I were discussing the weather or what I'd had for breakfast, "is from the Hartwell family. My family. My grandmother, specifically, who passed away 2 years ago and left her entire estate to me, her only grandchild. The property in Montecito was her house, where I spent every summer of my childhood. The Bay Area portfolio was built by my grandfather, over 40 years in tech. And Hartwell Industries, well, that was named after my great-grandfather, who founded it in 1952. The silence that followed was profound, heavy as a physical thing. I could hear everything in that silence. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the tick of the clock, the sound of someone's stomach gurgling, the rustle of Stephanie's dress as she shifted in her seat. Marcus had gone very still, his face cycling through emotions so quickly I could barely track them. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally, dawning horror. "That's not," he started, his voice strangled, his hand loosening on Stephanie's shoulder. "You never said. You told me it was family money. You thought it was your family money," I finished for him, and I let myself smile now, just a little, just enough. "You assumed, because I never corrected you. And why would I? We were married. What was mine was yours, or so I believed at the time. I never thought it would matter whose family the money came from." Marcus's mother had pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. Her face was flushed now, red patches appearing on her cheeks and neck, and her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "This is ridiculous. The documents say Hartwell Industries, but everyone knows that's been associated with the Whitmore family for years. We've been managing those investments, making decisions. With my permission," I interjected smoothly, pulling my phone from my purse. The screen lit up at my touch, bright in the dim office, which I gave, as the majority shareholder and primary beneficiary. But all the legal documents, all the actual ownership papers, they're in my name. Catherine Marie Hartwell. Not Hartwell Whitmore, you'll notice. Just Hartwell. My lawyer made sure of that when we set up the trust after my grandmother died. I pulled up my email, scrolling through until I found the one I wanted, sent just this morning, stamped with a timestamp 2 hours before this meeting began. In fact, I said, turning the phone so they could see the screen, though I doubted anyone could actually read it from where they sat. My lawyer confirmed this morning that all the necessary documentation has been filed with the appropriate authorities. The Hartwell estate, in its entirety, remains solely in my name and control. The lawyer, who had finally found his voice, made a sound like a dying animal. The documents, he said weakly, looking down at the papers I'd just signed, the papers he'd just notarized. The renunciation she just signed. I renounced my claim to the Whitmore family inheritance, I said patiently, as if explaining something to a child. Which I have no problem doing, since I never wanted your $6 million anyway. You're welcome to divide that up however you like among yourselves. Have a party. Take a vacation. I truly don't care. I could see Marcus's mind working, could almost watch the thoughts forming behind his eyes. His hand had fallen completely away from Stephanie now, and he was half standing, his body rigid with tension. You tricked us, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You knew what we thought, and you let us think it. I signed exactly what you asked me to sign, I replied calmly. You never asked me whose inheritance it was. You never asked to see the actual trust documents. You assumed, Marcus. You assumed because you wanted it to be true, because it fit the narrative you'd constructed where I was just some gold digger who'd married up and gotten lucky. I slipped my phone back into my purse, the small click of the clasp closing loud in the stunned silence. That's not my fault. Stephanie had started to cry, actual tears streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. The mascara ran in dark tracks down her cheeks, and she pressed her hands to her face, smearing it further. But you said, she sobbed, turning to Marcus, her voice high and breaking. You said we could buy the house in Malibu. You said we could travel, that we'd never have to worry about money again. We won't have to worry, Marcus said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes were still locked on me. The trust fund, the Whitmore money, it's still $6 million. Split how many ways? I asked, looking around the table at the assembled family members, counting silently. Among you, your parents, your brother, various cousins, who I'm sure will lawyer up the moment they hear about this. That's going to go fast, especially when you factor in legal fees, taxes, your expensive lifestyle. I tilted my head, considering. Stephanie, I hope you didn't quit your job yet. You might need it. You bitch! Marcus's mother hissed, finally finding words beyond her shock. She stood fully now, her whole body shaking with rage, her carefully composed society matron facade cracking completely. You manipulative, scheming little bitch. You played us all along, didn't you? Pretending to be so sweet, so grateful to be part of this family. I was grateful, I said honestly, and I found that it was true. For a while, at least. I loved Marcus, believed in our marriage, in our future. I would have shared everything with him, with all of you, if you'd ever once treated me like I actually belonged here, instead of like some temporary inconvenience you were forced to tolerate. I took a step toward the door, my hand on the handle, the cool metal pressing into my palm. But you couldn't do that, could you? I was always the outsider, always the girl who didn't quite fit, who didn't come from the right background, whose parents weren't important enough. Even when I was organizing your charity galas and hosting your dinner parties and making sure Marcus looked good for all his business associates, I was never really one of you. The door handle turned easily under my hand, well-oiled and smooth. The hallway beyond was bright, fluorescent light spilling in, and I could hear the normal sounds of an office building. Phones ringing, people talking, the distant ding of an elevator. The real world, waiting for me beyond this room of shock and fury and shattered expectations. So no, I continued, pulling the door open, feeling the rush of cooler air from the hallway wash over my face, bringing with it the smell of coffee and copy machine toner and other people's perfumes. I didn't trick you. I just stopped trying to be someone I'm not for people who never wanted me anyway. Enjoy your $6 million. I hope it brings you more happiness than it brought your grandfather. Wait, Marcus said, and there was desperation in his voice now, panic replacing the earlier certainty. He moved toward me, trying to put himself between me and the door, his hand reaching out as if to grab my arm. "We can fix this. We're still married. That money is still community property. A judge will—" "Actually," I said, pulling a folded set of documents from my purse, enjoying the way his face fell when he saw them. "I filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. You were served the papers at your office, though apparently you were too busy with Stephanie to read them carefully." I held them up just long enough for him to see the court seal, the official stamps, the signatures. "The preliminary hearing is next Tuesday. My lawyer assures me it will be remarkably straightforward, given the prenuptial agreement you insisted on." The prenup. God, I could see the memory of it hitting him, could watch the realization spread across his face like a stain. He'd insisted on it before we got married, had told me it was just standard practice, nothing personal. His lawyer had drawn it up, pages and pages of legalese that essentially said what was his stayed his, and what was mine stayed mine. I'd signed it without argument, young and in love, and certain that money didn't matter when you had real feelings. Marcus's family had been pleased, seeing it as proof that I wasn't after the Whitmore fortune. They'd never considered that I might have a fortune of my own. "The prenup," Marcus whispered, the color draining from his face. His hand dropped back to his side, and I watched him sway slightly, his center of gravity shifting as if the ground beneath him had become unstable. "But I thought," the lawyers said the marital assets would be divided according to the prenuptial agreement, I finished. "Which means you get the house in Brentwood, the one your parents bought for us as a wedding present. You get your trust fund, your share of the Whitmore estate. You get your car, your art collection, your golf club membership, all the things that were yours before we married, all the things acquired with Whitmore money during our marriage." I paused, letting it sink in. "And I get the things that were mine. The Hartwell estate, the investments my grandmother left me, the properties my family built over generations. All of it, completely separate and untouchable by divorce proceedings." The lawyer had sunk back into his chair, and he was staring at the documents in front of him with an expression of absolute horror. His carefully constructed case, his billable hours, his fee that was probably contingent on successfully stripping me of an inheritance that was never legally part of the marital estate in the first place, all of it was evaporating before his eyes. "I'll need to consult with my firm," he said weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. "There might be grounds for." "For what?" I asked pleasantly. "I signed your documents in good faith. You asked me to renounce my claim to the family inheritance, and I did. It's not my fault you didn't specify which family you meant. And as for the divorce, well, your client signed a prenuptial agreement that explicitly protects premarital assets and inherited wealth. My lawyers assure me it's ironclad. But please do consult with your firm. I'm sure they'll be happy to take more of Marcus's money before telling him the same thing." I stepped fully into the hallway now, my body half in and half out of the office, straddling the threshold between my old life and whatever came next. The carpet in the hallway was a practical gray, worn in paths where countless feet had walked before mine, and I could feel the slight give of it under my heels, so different from the hard floor of the conference room. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting, voices rising in anger and accusation and despair. Marcus was shouting something, his words running together so fast I couldn't make them out. His mother was screaming at the lawyer, demanding he fix this, do something, earn his goddamn fee. Stephanie was still crying, her sobs now interspersed with hiccups that would have been funny in any other context. Marcus's father was on his phone, probably calling his own lawyer, his voice tight and controlled but with an undercurrent of fury that made his words sharp. His brother was cursing, a steady stream of profanity that seemed to be directed at no one and everyone simultaneously. But I didn't stay to listen. I walked away, down the long corridor toward the elevators, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the floor. With each step, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding weight I hadn't known I was carrying. The weight of their expectations, their judgment, their casual cruelty disguised as family bonding. The weight of trying to be good enough, trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. The weight of a marriage that had died long before Marcus brought his mistress into the equation. The elevator doors opened immediately when I pressed the button, and I stepped inside, turning to face the hallway one last time. In the distance, I could see Marcus emerge from the conference room, his face red, his tie askew, his expensive suit somehow looking rumpled despite the fact that he'd barely moved. He was running toward me, his mouth open, his hand outstretched. But the doors were already closing, sliding shut with a soft, mechanical hum that cut off his shout halfway through. The last thing I saw was his face, twisted with rage and disbelief, and the beginning understanding of what he'd just lost. Not the money, though that would sting his pride, but the control, the power, the certainty that he could discard me like I was nothing and come out ahead. The elevator began to descend, and I leaned against the back wall, feeling the vibration of the machinery through the metal, hearing the cables and pulleys working to carry me down to the ground floor. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel doors, and I barely recognized the woman I saw there. She looked calm, composed, maybe even a little bit dangerous. Her lipstick was still perfect, not a hair out of place, but there was something different in her eyes, something hard and satisfied that hadn't been there this morning. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out to find a text from Rebecca, my actual lawyer, the one who'd been helping me plan this moment for 3 months. How did it go? The message read, followed by a string of anticipatory emojis that made me smile despite everything. I typed back quickly, my thumbs moving across the screen. Better than expected. They never asked to see the trust documents. Signed everything without question. Her response was immediate. You're brilliant. Dinner tonight to celebrate? My treat. Absolutely, I replied. Somewhere expensive. I can afford it. The elevator reached the ground floor with a gentle bump, and the doors slid open to reveal the lobby. It was all marble and glass, expensive and impressive in the way that buildings housing law firms and investment companies always were. People moved through the space with purpose, their footsteps echoing, their faces set in expressions of concentration or concern or carefully crafted neutrality. The world was continuing on, oblivious to the small drama that had just played out 20 floors above. I walked through the revolving door and out onto the street, and the afternoon sun hit me full in the face, warm and bright after the artificial chill of the air-conditioned building. The sidewalk was crowded with the usual mix of business people and tourists, everyone moving with that particular Los Angeles energy, fast-paced but somehow still relaxed, always aware of the cameras that might be watching. Car horns blared in the street, and I could smell exhaust mixed with the sweet scent from the flower cart on the corner, roses and lilies and something tropical I couldn't identify. I pulled my sunglasses from my purse and slid them on, feeling the world dim slightly behind the dark lenses. My car was in the garage 2 blocks away, and I started walking, my stride confident, unhurried. I had nowhere to be, no obligations, no husband to check in with or in-laws to please. For the first time in 8 years, my time was completely my own. My phone buzzed again, multiple times in quick succession. I glanced at the screen to see Marcus's name appearing over and over, calls coming in one after another. I declined each one, watching his name flash and disappear. Then came the texts, dozens of them, appearing so fast I couldn't have read them even if I wanted to. We need to talk, read the first one I caught a glimpse of. This isn't over, read another. You can't do this to me, said a third. The entitlement in those messages, the assumption that I owed him my time and attention even now, even after everything, would have made me angry if I'd had any anger left to spare. But I found I didn't. I just felt tired and relieved and ready to be done. The parking garage was cool and dim after the bright sunlight, and the change in temperature made goosebumps rise on my arms. The concrete smelled like oil and exhaust, and that particular underground mustiness that all parking structures seem to share. My footsteps echoed off the low ceiling as I made my way to where I'd left my car, the sound bouncing back at me from multiple directions, making it seem like there were dozens of people walking instead of just me. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system, the distant slam of a car door, someone's car alarm going off several levels away, the shrill beeping muffled by distance but still audible. My car was exactly where I'd left it, parallel parked between a gleaming Tesla and a Range Rover that probably cost more than most people's houses. It was a modest sedan, practical and reliable, the kind of car a nurse would drive. I'd kept it even after marrying Marcus, even though he'd complained about it, said it made him look bad when we pulled up to events in something so ordinary. He'd wanted me to get something flashier, something that would reflect what he saw as our status, but I'd refused. This car had been my first major purchase after nursing school, bought with my own money, and I wasn't going to give it up just to satisfy his ego. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, and the familiar smell of the interior washed over me. Old coffee from the cup I'd forgotten in the holder last week, the lavender air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror that my best friend had given me, the leather cleaner I'd used yesterday. The seat adjusted to fit my body perfectly. worn in after years of use, and I let myself sit there for a moment in the dim light, my hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the texture of it under my palms. My phone was still buzzing. Marcus, relentless, desperate, angry. I pulled it out and, without letting myself think too hard about it, blocked his number. The action was simple, just a few taps on the screen, but it felt monumental. Final. I watched his name disappear from my recent calls, and something in my chest loosened, like a fist unclenching after holding tight for too long. Then I called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright and eager. "Tell me everything," she demanded before I could even say hello. "Leave nothing out. I want all the details." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its genuine amusement. "They really thought they had it all figured out," I said, starting the car and listening to the engine turn over with a reliable purr. "You should have seen their faces when I mentioned whose family the money actually came from. Marcus's mother looked like she was going to have a stroke." "God, I wish I could have been there," Rebecca said, and I could hear her grinning through the phone. Though it's probably better that I wasn't. I would have started laughing, and that would have given the game away too early. There was the sound of papers rustling in the background, the click of a keyboard. I've been monitoring the accounts all afternoon, just in case they tried something desperate, but everything's locked down tight. They can't touch a penny of it. "Good," I said, maneuvering out of the parking space, checking my mirrors carefully, feeling the familiar rhythm of driving settling over me like a comfortable blanket. Though I don't think it's really sunk in yet. Marcus was still trying to convince himself there must be some loophole, some way to contest it. "There isn't," Rebecca said firmly, and her voice took on that particular quality she got when discussing legal matters, confident and unshakable. "I've had 3 other firms review everything. The Hartwell estate is yours, completely separate from any marital assets. The prenup he insisted on actually works in your favor, since it explicitly protects inherited wealth. And you renouncing your claim to the Whitmore inheritance? That was just the cherry on top. They can't even claim you tricked them, since you gave them exactly what they asked for." The parking garage exit led directly into late afternoon traffic, and I merged carefully, feeling the sun on my left arm through the window, warm and almost heavy. The city sprawled around me, all palm trees and billboards and cars that cost more than most people made in a year. Los Angeles in all its contradictory glory, beautiful and ugly, generous and cruel, dreamlike and brutally real. "Dinner tonight?" I asked, changing lanes to avoid a truck that was moving too slowly. "You said your treat, but I'm buying. I feel like celebrating." "Deal," Rebecca agreed. "That new place in Santa Monica? I've been dying to try it, but it's so expensive I've been waiting for a special occasion." "Perfect," I said. 8 o'clock? "I'll make a reservation," she said, and I could hear her already typing. "Catherine, I'm really proud of you. I know this wasn't easy. Planning all this while still living with him, pretending everything was normal. It hadn't been easy. The past 3 months since I'd discovered Marcus's affair had been some of the hardest of my life. Finding out had been almost mundane, stupidly cliché. His phone, left unlocked on the bathroom counter while he was in the shower. A text from Steve from the gym that was very clearly not from Steve or about the gym. I'd scrolled through the messages with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold the phone, reading words that turned my entire marriage into a lie. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself, though that had hurt, had felt like something vital tearing inside my chest. It was the casual cruelty in the messages. The way he talked about me, complained about me, made jokes at my expense. "The wife is going through another one of her save-the-world phases," he'd written. "Volunteering at the free clinic again. God forbid she just enjoy the life I've given her." And Stephanie had responded with a laughing emoji, had written back, "Poor baby, stuck with a saint. You deserve someone who appreciates you." I'd put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, my hands still shaking, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. I'd gone to our bedroom, our perfectly decorated bedroom with its California king and its designer linens and its view of the city, and I'd sat on the edge of the bed and cried so hard I thought I might be sick. The sound of the shower running had been a strange counterpoint to my sobbing, Marcus humming tunelessly while my world fell apart. But then, after the tears had stopped, after I'd washed my face and fixed my makeup and made sure there was no evidence of my breakdown, something else had kicked in. Not anger, though that would come later. Not even hurt, though that was there too, a constant ache under my ribs. What I felt was clarity, sharp and cold and utterly certain. I wasn't going to beg him to stay. I wasn't going to fight for a marriage he'd already abandoned. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I was going to be smart, strategic. I was going to protect myself and my future, and I was going to make sure that when Marcus Whitmore looked back on this moment, he would regret it for the rest of his life. So I'd called Rebecca the next day, had met her for coffee at a place far from our usual spots, somewhere I knew none of Marcus's friends or family would see us. She'd been my lawyer for years, had helped me set up the trusts after my grandmother died, had drawn up the paperwork that kept the Hartwell estate separate and protected. She knew everything about my financial situation, knew things that Marcus had never bothered to ask about. "He's having an affair," I'd told her, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup, feeling the heat of it seep into my palms. The cafe had been busy, full of the morning rush, people ordering complicated drinks and tapping away on laptops. The air had smelled like espresso and vanilla syrup and someone's too strong perfume. Rebecca hadn't seemed surprised. She'd just nodded slowly, her sharp eyes assessing, already thinking ahead. "Are you sure?" she'd asked, though her tone suggested she believed me. "I'm sure," I'd said, and then I'd told her everything. The messages, the late nights at work that didn't correspond with anything on his actual calendar, the way he'd been distant for months, the credit card charges for restaurants I'd never been to, and hotels in cities he'd supposedly visited alone for business. "What do you want to do?" Rebecca had asked when I'd finished, and I'd loved her for that, for not telling me what I should do, for not suggesting counseling or second chances or any of the things that people always suggested when a marriage was failing. "I want a divorce," I'd said, and saying it out loud had felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. "And I want to make sure he can't take anything from me. The Hartwell estate, my grandmother's money, all of it. It stays mine." Rebecca had smiled then, a sharp, satisfied smile that reminded me why she was one of the best divorce lawyers in Los Angeles. "The prenup protects you there," she'd said. "Everything you inherited is separate property. He has no claim to it." Then she'd paused, her head tilting slightly. "But does he know that? Does his family know that?" I'd thought about it, replaying conversations from over the years, trying to remember if I'd ever explicitly told Marcus about the details of my inheritance. I'd told him when my grandmother died, of course. Had cried on his shoulder about losing her, about how much she'd meant to me. I'd mentioned the inheritance, the shock of realizing just how much she'd saved and invested over her lifetime. But the specifics? The actual numbers? The exact nature of the trusts? The fact that it was all in my name alone? "I don't think so," I'd said slowly. "He knows there's family money, but he's always just assumed, I think. He knows about Hartwell Industries, knows I have some connection to it, but he's never asked for details. He's never actually looked at any of the paperwork. So as far as he knows," Rebecca had said, her voice taking on that considering tone that meant her mind was working through scenarios, "the family fortune, the estate, the business holdings, it could all be Whitmore money, especially since you took his name. Hyphenated it," I'd corrected automatically. "Hartwell Whitmore." "Even better," she'd said. "It blurs the lines. His family could easily have convinced themselves that the Hartwell assets were just another name for Whitmore Holdings, especially if they've been involved in managing some of the investments." She'd leaned forward then, her coffee forgotten, her eyes bright with interest. "Catherine, I have an idea. It's a bit theatrical, maybe even a little bit cruel, but if you want to really make sure he understands what he's giving up, what he's throwing away for his affair, I think we could arrange something." And she'd laid it out for me, the plan that had culminated in this afternoon's meeting. File the divorce papers, but do it quietly. Serve them at his office where he'd be too busy to really pay attention. Let him think he was in control. Let him think he could dictate the terms. When he inevitably demanded I sign away my rights to the family inheritance, let him think he meant the Hartwell estate. Draw up documents that were technically accurate but deliberately vague about which family was being referenced. And then, only after I'd signed everything, only after he'd celebrated what he thought was his victory, reveal the truth. "It's risky," Rebecca had warned. "If he figures it out before you sign, the whole thing falls apart. And you'll have to play along, have to let him think he's winning. That might be hard." "I can do it," I'd said, and I'd been surprised by how certain I'd sounded, how steady. "He's already thrown away 8 years of marriage. I can handle a few months of pretending." Now, sitting in traffic on Wilshire Boulevard with the sun beating down through my windshield and my air conditioning struggling to keep up, I felt nothing but satisfaction. It had worked exactly as Rebecca had planned. Better, even, because I'd never imagined Marcus would be stupid enough to bring Stephanie to the meeting, to kiss her right there in front of me like he was rubbing my face in his victory. My phone rang again, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, a different number. Voicemail again. They were trying to get around the block, using different phones, probably calling from the lawyer's office. I could picture them all standing around, panicking, trying to figure out how to fix what couldn't be fixed. The third time an unknown number called, I answered it, putting it on speaker while I drove. "What?" I said, not bothering to hide my irritation. "Catherine." It was Marcus's mother, her voice clipped and cold as ice. "We need to speak. Immediately." "I'm driving," I said pleasantly, "and I have plans this evening. If you need to speak with me about anything related to the divorce, you can contact my lawyer." "Don't you dare hang up on me," she snapped, and I could hear the fury in her voice, barely controlled. "You think you're very clever, don't you? Playing your little games, lying to this family." "I never lied," I said, braking as the car in front of me stopped suddenly, feeling the seatbelt catch against my chest. "I answered every question truthfully. It's not my fault none of you bothered to ask the right questions." "You deliberately misled us," she insisted, and I could hear other voices in the background arguing among themselves. "You knew Marcus thought the Hartwell money was part of the Whitmore estate. You should have corrected him." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You never corrected any of your assumptions about me. You never asked about my family, my background, what I brought to the marriage besides my charming personality, and my willingness to put up with your passive-aggressive comments at every family dinner. You decided who I was the moment Marcus introduced me, and nothing I did in 8 years changed your mind." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing, harsh and angry. "This is about more than hurt feelings," she said finally. "You're trying to punish Marcus for making a mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, and I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Is that what we're calling affairs now? Mistakes? Like he accidentally tripped and fell into a relationship with another woman? Like he accidentally spent months lying to me, sneaking around, making plans for a future that didn't include me? He's a man," she said, as if that explained everything, excused everything. "Men make mistakes, but you're his wife. You took vows, for better or worse, in sickness and health. You're supposed to stand by him." The traffic light ahead turned red, and I stopped, taking the opportunity to really let her words sink in. The audacity of them, the sheer entitlement, that I was supposed to stand by a man who'd betrayed me, humiliated me, tried to take everything I had, just because we'd said some words in front of a priest 8 years ago. That my vows were supposed to be ironclad while his were apparently optional, subject to his desires and whims. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, and my voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made the words hit harder. "Marcus stood by me right up until the moment he decided he'd rather stand with someone else. He made his choice. He chose her, chose whatever future he thinks he's building with her. I'm just making sure that future is built on reality, not on money that was never his to begin with." "You vindictive little—" she started, but I didn't let her finish. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings," I said, speaking over her. "All communication should go through her from now on. Have a nice evening." I hung up before she could respond, and immediately added the number to my blocked list. My hands were shaking slightly on the steering wheel, adrenaline coursing through my system, making my heart race and my palms sweat. But underneath the physical reaction, I felt strong, certain. For 8 years, I'd let that woman make me feel small, had accepted her criticisms and her cold silences and her constant subtle suggestions that I wasn't good enough for her son. No more. The light turned green, and I pressed on the gas, feeling the car respond, carrying me forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Just got a call from opposing counsel. They want an emergency meeting. I told them to schedule it through proper channels. This is going to be fun." I smiled, typing back one-handed while I waited at the next light. "Let them panic. We hold all the cards." "All the cards and all the money," she replied, followed by a string of celebration emojis that made me laugh out loud. The restaurant Rebecca had chosen was in Santa Monica, right near the ocean. And by the time I found parking and walked the 2 blocks to the entrance, the sun was just beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, the colors reflecting off the windows of the buildings around me, and I could smell the salt air, hear the distant sound of waves and seagulls and street performers entertaining the tourists on the pier. The sidewalk was crowded with people enjoying the evening, couples holding hands, families with tired children, groups of friends laughing over shared jokes. Rebecca was already there, seated at a table near the window with a view of the ocean. She stood when she saw me, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her familiar perfume, something with notes of citrus and sandalwood. "You did it," she said into my hair, squeezing tight. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected, pulling back to look at her. Rebecca was beautiful in that sharp, professional way that made people take her seriously in courtrooms. Her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, her suit perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless. We'd met in college, had been roommates our sophomore year, and had stayed close even when our lives took very different paths. When I'd gone into nursing and she'd gone to law school, when I'd married Marcus and she'd built her practice through everything, she'd been my constant. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the chair across from her. I ordered us champagne, the good stuff. We're celebrating properly. The waiter appeared almost immediately, as if summoned, carrying an ice bucket with a bottle that I recognized even from a distance as expensive. He poured for both of us with practiced elegance, the liquid golden in the glasses, tiny bubbles rising in perfect columns. When he'd retreated, Rebecca raised her glass, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "To freedom," she said simply. "To freedom," I echoed, and we clinked glasses, the sound crystalline and pure. The champagne was cold and perfect, the taste complex and slightly sweet, and I let myself savor it, let myself sit in this moment of triumph. "So," Rebecca said, setting down her glass and leaning forward with the eagerness of someone about to hear an excellent story. From the beginning, every single detail. I told her everything, watching her face cycle through expressions of delight and satisfaction and outright glee. When I got to the part about Marcus kissing Stephanie right there in the office, Rebecca actually clapped her hands together. "Oh my God," she said. "He really is that stupid. I mean, I knew he was cheating, obviously, but to bring her to the meeting? To celebrate in front of you like that? I think he wanted to hurt me," I said, taking another sip of champagne. "Wanted me to see what I was losing, see him choosing her over me. He thought he was twisting the knife. Instead, he was giving you the perfect motivation to twist the knife on him," Rebecca said with satisfaction. "Poetic justice at its finest." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "How are you, though? Really? This is still your marriage ending, still 8 years of your life." I thought about it, trying to identify what I was actually feeling under all the adrenaline and satisfaction and relief. There was sadness there, I realized, but it was distant, muted, like an old bruise that didn't quite hurt anymore. "I think I started mourning the marriage months ago," I said slowly. "Maybe even before I found out about the affair. Things hadn't been right for a while. He'd been pulling away, becoming someone I didn't recognize. The Marcus I married, the one I fell in love with, he wouldn't have done any of this. Wouldn't have cheated, wouldn't have tried to take my inheritance, wouldn't have brought his mistress to humiliate me. People change," Rebecca said quietly. "Not always for the better." "Yeah," I agreed. "They do." I swirled the champagne in my glass, watching the bubbles dance. "But you know what? I think I'm going to be okay. Better than okay. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Like I can just be myself without worrying about what the Whitmores think, without trying to fit into their world." "What are you going to do now?" Rebecca asked. "Any plans?" I hadn't really thought about it, had been so focused on getting through the meeting, on executing the plan, that I hadn't looked beyond today. But now, sitting here with my best friend and expensive champagne and the sound of the ocean in the background, possibilities seemed to unfold in front of me like a map. "I want to travel," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully formed the thought. "My grandmother left me that house in Montecito. I haven't been there since she died. Couldn't face it. But maybe it's time. I could spend some time there. Figure out what I want to do with it." "Sell it?" Rebecca asked. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe live in it for a while. It's been sitting empty, just a property manager checking on it once a month. My grandmother loved that house. She used to sit on the back terrace in the evenings and watch the sunset over the mountains, and she'd tell me stories about when she was young, about building the business with my grandfather, about all the things they'd dreamed of doing." I felt my throat tighten with emotion, the champagne making me more vulnerable than I'd intended. "I think she'd want me to use it, to enjoy it, not just keep it as some kind of shrine." "She'd be proud of you," Rebecca said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her palm was warm against mine, grounding. "For standing up for yourself, for not letting them take what's yours." "I hope so," I said. The waiter returned to take our orders, and we spent the next few minutes deciding on dishes, the normalcy of it strange and comforting after the intensity of the afternoon. When he'd gone, Rebecca pulled out her tablet, her expression shifting into business mode. "We need to talk logistics," she said, swiping through screens. "The divorce will move forward quickly now. With the prenup in place and no contested assets, we're looking at maybe 3 months, possibly less. Marcus's lawyers will try to find loopholes, but there aren't any. I've had the documents reviewed by everyone I trust, and they all say the same thing. You're protected." "What about the Whitmore family?" I asked. "Can they cause problems? Try to sue or something?" "For what?" Rebecca said with a slight smile. "You didn't defraud them. You didn't lie. You signed exactly what they asked you to sign. The fact that they were too arrogant to verify which family inheritance they were referring to isn't your legal problem. It's embarrassing for them, certainly. Expensive, probably, since I'm sure they've already paid significant legal fees. But it's not actionable." The food arrived in waves, each dish more beautiful than the last, arranged on plates like art. The scents mixed together, savory and rich, making my stomach remind me that I'd been too nervous to eat lunch. I picked up my fork, the weight of it substantial in my hand, real silver that caught the candlelight. The first bite was perfect, flavors exploding on my tongue, and I realized that this was the first meal in months that I'd truly tasted, truly enjoyed, without the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. "There's something else," Rebecca said, pausing with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Your position at Hartwell Industries. Your grandmother left you controlling shares, but you've never actually taken an active role in running the company. Have you thought about changing that?" I hadn't. The board of directors had been managing things for the past 2 years, and from what I understood, they were doing a good job. The quarterly reports Rebecca sent me showed steady growth, healthy profits. I'd attended a few meetings in the beginning, but they'd been overwhelming, full of jargon and politics I didn't understand, and eventually I'd just let them handle it while I focused on my nursing career and my failing marriage. "I don't know anything about running a tech company," I said honestly. "I'm a nurse. I know how to start IVs and read cardiac monitors and talk families through the worst moments of their lives. I don't know how to manage a corporation." "You could learn," Rebecca said, "or you could hire people to teach you. It's your company, Catherine, your legacy, and it's worth thinking about what you want to do with it." She took a bite of her food, chewing thoughtfully before continuing. "Right now, you're letting other people make decisions about something that belongs to you, just like you let Marcus and his family make you feel like you didn't belong, like you were lesser. Maybe it's time to stop doing that." Her words hit harder than I'd expected, settling somewhere deep in my chest. She was right. I'd spent so much of my adult life making myself smaller, letting other people define me, shape me, tell me what I should want and who I should be. I'd gone into nursing because I loved it, because I wanted to help people, but I'd stayed working night shifts at the hospital even when I didn't need the money because Marcus had made it clear he didn't think my career mattered, that it was just a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Right now, I just need to get through the divorce. But after, maybe I'll look into it more seriously." The rest of dinner passed in easy conversation, Rebecca filling me in on her latest cases, me telling her about some of the more memorable patients I'd treated recently. The champagne was replaced with wine, the wine with coffee, and by the time we finished dessert, the sky outside was fully dark, the ocean invisible except for the sound of it, waves crashing against the shore in a rhythm that felt eternal and soothing. "Want to walk?" Rebecca asked as we paid the bill, waving away my attempt to split it. "I said my treat, remember? You can buy next time." We walked down to the beach, slipping off our shoes and feeling the sand between our toes, still warm from the day's sun. The beach wasn't crowded at this hour, just a few other people walking dogs or sitting around small fires, the smell of wood smoke mixing with the salt air. The sand was soft and shifting under my feet, each step sinking slightly, and I had to focus on my balance, on the physical sensation of walking, which kept my mind from spinning into the future or dwelling on the past. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said after we'd walked in silence for a while, the sound of the waves almost hypnotic. "That moment when I signed the papers. Everyone was so focused on what they thought they were taking from me that nobody stopped to actually read what they were giving me permission to keep. It's like they were so convinced of their own narrative that they couldn't see reality." "People do that," Rebecca said, bending to pick up a shell, its surface smooth and pearlescent in the moonlight. "They build a story in their heads about how things are, how things should be, and then they ignore any evidence that contradicts it. Marcus built a story where you were the poor girl who'd married up, who should be grateful for the Whitmore name and the Whitmore money. His family built the same story. It never occurred to any of them to question it. But they could have. I said. At any point over 8 years, they could have asked. Could have looked at the actual paperwork. Could have wondered why I kept my maiden name. Could have been curious about my family instead of dismissing them as unimportant. Would it have changed anything? Rebecca asked gently. If they'd known from the beginning that you had your own money, your own legacy, would they have treated you better, or would they just have been more careful about protecting what they thought was theirs? I considered that, watching the moonlight reflect off the waves, each crest catching the light for a moment before disappearing back into darkness. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe it would have been worse. Maybe they would have felt threatened, tried to control me more. At least this way, I had time to figure out who they really were before I had to make any decisions. And now you know, Rebecca said. Now you've seen exactly what they're capable of when they think there's something to gain. That's valuable information. We walked until my feet started to hurt, until the restaurants and shops behind us had given way to darker stretches of beach and private residences. Then we turned back, retracing our steps through sand that had cooled now that the sun was long gone. By the time we reached Rebecca's car, I was exhausted, the emotional weight of the day finally catching up with me. Thank you, I said, hugging her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent, feeling the solid reality of her presence. For everything. For planning all this. For having my back. For being the one person I could trust completely. Always, she said fiercely, pulling back to look at me, her hands on my shoulders. I'm so glad you called me that day. So glad you didn't try to handle this alone. She paused, her expression growing more serious. You know it's not over yet, right? Marcus and his family, they're going to keep trying. They're going to be angry. They're going to try to make trouble. The next few months might get ugly. Let them try, I said, and I was surprised by how calm I felt, how centered. I'm not the same person I was this morning. I'm not the person who would have let them intimidate me, make me feel guilty for protecting what's mine. They showed me who they are. Now I get to show them who I am. That night, I drove back to the house in Brentwood, the one Marcus's parents had bought for us as a wedding gift, the one I'd decorated and maintained and tried to make into a home for 8 years. It felt strange pulling into the driveway, knowing that this was temporary, that soon I'd be leaving it behind completely. The house was dark except for the automatic lights that turned on as I approached, illuminating the perfectly manicured lawn, the expensive landscaping, the facade that looked like something out of a magazine. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. The coffee cup I'd used still in the sink, rinsed but not washed. The stack of mail on the counter that I'd been meaning to sort through. The faint scent of the candle I'd burned the night before. Something with vanilla and cinnamon that had made the house smell warm and inviting. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. Maybe it never had. This had always been the Whitmore house, filled with furniture they'd chosen, decorated according to their taste, located in the neighborhood they'd approved of. My phone had dozens of missed calls and messages, more unknown numbers trying to get through. I ignored all of them, setting the phone on the counter and walking through the house, really looking at it for the first time in months. The living room with its uncomfortable formal furniture that looked beautiful but felt like sitting on rocks. The dining room where we'd hosted countless dinner parties for Marcus's business associates, where I'd smiled and served and played the perfect hostess while conversations flowed around me about things I wasn't supposed to understand. The bedroom upstairs with its massive bed that had felt increasingly empty even when Marcus was in it. I'd take my personal things, I decided. The photos of my family, the jewelry my grandmother had given me, my clothes and books, and the few items that actually felt like mine. The rest of it, all the expensive furniture and art and designer accessories, Marcus could have it all. I didn't want any of it. Didn't want the memories attached to it. Didn't want the weight of trying to maintain this image of perfection. In my grandmother's last letter to me, written just before she died and delivered by her lawyer along with all the trust documents, she'd written something I'd read dozens of times but never fully understood until now. Catherine, it had said in her spidery handwriting, money is just a tool. It can't make you happy, can't make people love you, can't fix what's broken, but it can give you choices, can give you freedom, can give you the power to walk away from situations that diminish you. Use it wisely. Use it to build a life that makes you proud, not a life that makes other people comfortable. I pulled out the letter now, kept always in my purse, the paper soft from being folded and refolded so many times. Reading it again in the empty house, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me. The money wasn't the point. The inheritance, the estate, the controlling shares in the company, None of that mattered except for what it represented: the ability to choose, to say no, to walk away, to refuse to be diminished or controlled or made to feel lesser. "I'm choosing," I said aloud to the empty room, to my grandmother's memory, to whatever version of myself had walked into that lawyer's office this afternoon. "I'm choosing me." 2 days later, I woke up to my phone ringing insistently, the sound pulling me out of a deep, dreamless sleep. For a moment, I was disoriented, forgetting where I was, why I was alone in the bed. Then it all came back in a rush and I grabbed my phone, squinting at the screen. Rebecca. I answered immediately, my heart suddenly pounding. "Turn on the news," she said without preamble, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Channel 7, do it now." I fumbled for the remote, turning on the TV mounted on the wall across from the bed. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the bright screen, for the image to resolve into something I could understand. Then I saw it. Marcus, standing in front of a cluster of microphones, looking haggard and pale, his usual polish completely gone. Behind him stood his lawyer, the same nervous man from the meeting. And further back, barely visible in the frame, I could see Marcus's mother and Stephanie. "Sources say that Whitmore incorrectly believed he was entitled to his estranged wife's inheritance," the reporter was saying, her voice professional and detached. "But the substantial Hartwell estate, estimated at over $47 million, belongs solely to Catherine Hartwell, not to the Whitmore family as had been assumed." The camera cut to Marcus trying to speak, but his words were barely coherent, something about misunderstandings and legal complications and family matters that should have remained private. His mother tried to push forward, but the lawyer pulled her back, probably recognizing that anything she said would only make things worse. "How did this get out?" I asked Rebecca, unable to look away from the screen. "They filed papers yesterday," Rebecca said, and I could hear her grinning. "Trying to challenge the divorce, claiming fraud. They had to disclose the details of the case, including the nature of the assets in question. A reporter picked it up, made some calls, did some digging. The story broke an hour ago, and it's everywhere. TMZ, CNN, even the Wall Street Journal has something up." I watched as the news segment continued, showing file footage of Hartwell Industries headquarters, stock images of the Montecito estate, a photo of my grandmother from her days running the company. Then, almost as an afterthought, they showed my nursing school graduation photo, the one that was publicly available on the hospital website. "Catherine Hartwell," the reporter said, formerly known as Catherine Whitmore, has worked as a registered nurse at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center throughout her marriage, despite her substantial personal wealth. Hospital staff describe her as dedicated and compassionate, with several commendations for her patient care. "Oh God," I said, covering my face with my hand, "this is going to be a circus." "It already is," Rebecca agreed cheerfully. "But Catherine, this is actually good for us. Public opinion is going to be on your side. Rich husband cheats on his nurse wife, tries to take her family money, gets humiliated when it turns out she was the rich one all along. That's a story people are going to eat up. Marcus and his family are going to be a laughingstock." She was right. Over the next few hours, as I sat in bed watching the story spread across every news outlet and social media platform, I saw the narrative take shape. I was the hard-working nurse who'd married for love, not money. Marcus was the entitled rich boy who'd taken his wife for granted and paid the price. His family were the snobs who'd looked down on someone they thought was beneath them, only to discover she was wealthier than they'd ever be. Stephanie was the other woman who'd thought she was upgrading, only to find out she'd gotten the consolation prize. My phone started ringing off the hook, numbers I didn't recognize, reporters trying to get a comment. I turned it off completely, letting Rebecca field any calls that actually mattered. The hospital called my personal email, asking if I wanted to take some time off, offering support and understanding in carefully worded corporate language that made it clear they were worried about the publicity affecting them. I did take time off, not because I was embarrassed or overwhelmed, but because I needed space to think, to figure out what came next. That afternoon, I drove up to Montecito to my grandmother's house, the house that was now my house. The drive took a little over an hour, traffic thinning once I got out of Los Angeles proper. The landscape opening up into the kind of California beauty that never got old. Rolling hills, glimpses of ocean, trees that seemed to glow golden in the afternoon light. The house was exactly as I remembered it. A Spanish colonial revival with white stucco walls and a terracotta tile roof, surrounded by gardens that the property manager had kept immaculate. The gate opened with my code, and I drove up the long driveway, lined with olive trees my grandfather had planted 60 years ago. The smell of eucalyptus and jasmine was overwhelming when I stepped out of the car, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing it in, letting the memories wash over me. Inside, dust covers protected the furniture, but I could still see the bones of the place. Could still remember summers spent running through these rooms, my grandmother calling after me to slow down, to be careful. The back terrace was just as I remembered it. Stone tiles warm under my bare feet, the view stretching out over the gardens to the mountains beyond. I sat in one of the wrought iron chairs, the metal surprisingly comfortable, and watched the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. My phone, turned back on despite my better judgment, buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Marcus withdrew his challenge. Divorce proceeding as planned. It's over. It's over. The words should have brought relief, satisfaction, triumph. And they did, but they also brought something else. Possibility. The end of one thing, the beginning of something new. I had $47 million, give or take. I had a company I knew nothing about but could learn to run. I had a house that needed someone to bring it back to life. I had time, freedom, choices. I had myself, whole and undiminished, maybe for the first time in years. "Okay, Grandma," I said aloud, my voice carrying across the empty terrace. "Let's see what I can build." The sun set in shades of orange and gold and deep purple, painting the sky in colors so vivid they didn't seem real. I sat there until the stars came out, until the air grew cool and I had to wrap my arms around myself for warmth. In the distance, I could hear music from somewhere, someone's party or celebration, the sound drifting across the valley like a promise. Tomorrow, I'd start making plans. I'd meet with the board at Hartwell Industries, start learning the business my family had built. I'd talk to real estate agents about what to do with the Bay Area properties. I'd go through this house room by room, deciding what to keep and what to update, making it mine in a way it had never quite been, even when my grandmother was alive. I'd call the hospital and let them know when I'd be back. Or maybe I'd decide not to go back at all. Not because nursing didn't matter, but because maybe I was meant to do something different now. But tonight, I just sat in the gathering darkness and felt the weight of everything that had happened settle over me like a blanket. The marriage that had ended. The betrayal that had hurt less than it should have. The inheritance that had always been mine, but that I'd never really claimed. The future that stretched out ahead of me, unknown and slightly terrifying and full of potential. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Marcus was probably trying to salvage what remained of his reputation, fielding calls from friends and business associates who'd seen the news, explaining and justifying and trying to make himself look less foolish. His family was probably in crisis mode, hiring PR firms and damage control specialists, trying to figure out how to spin the story in their favor. Stephanie was probably realizing that the wealthy future she'd imagined was never going to materialize, that she'd destroyed one relationship and gained nothing but notoriety in return. I found I didn't care. Not out of vindictiveness or cruelty, but out of simple disinterest. They'd made their choices, just as I'd made mine. We were all living with the consequences now. A breeze picked up, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the gardens below, and I closed my eyes, letting myself just feel it. The coolness of the air on my skin, the solidness of the chair beneath me, the sounds of the evening settling in around me. This moment, right here, sitting on my grandmother's terrace in a house that was now mine, free of a marriage that had been dying for longer than I'd wanted to admit, on the precipice of a future I couldn't quite see but was no longer afraid of. This was enough. This was everything. This was the beginning.